Hey team, how are you? This is Dr. Mac. I just wanted to give you a quick uh, glue, so to speak, of everything that we have done so far and what we have to come, and also give you a little bit of feedback on the very last assignment. So what I have on the screen right now is essentially the outline of what you see as the hat, very high level. So don't think that because I don't have some things listed in there, they shouldn't exist. But so far where we are today, so we already gave the purpose or gave the background of the project. Remember, what we are doing right now is we are practicing how to create training. The premise is the training is going to be created only if it's needed. So we have to begin with a needs analysis, which is this second item over here. Once we have done the needs analysis, we are going to be able to describe what the current state is and what the future state is, or what the desired state. So between those two, we find a gap. And so we have that gap, and then we have to make a decision. Is the gap something that we can resolve by means of training? So some of your projects, as you think about your project topic, some of them are very clear in terms of this. Some of them are not so clear, and that's probably where you may find it a little difficult to come up with some of the deliverables that we are asking. And so that's where the challenge lies. However, that does not necessarily mean that it's not what happens in real life. Many a times we are asked to solve a gap when we can't physically wrap our arms around what training is needed for some solutions. So we have to be careful. But what is true is once we have decided that we are going to use training to solve this problem or to close the gap, we have to be very intentional in describing what we're going to do. So in order to do that, we move into the learner analysis. We say who we are going to be affecting for this. So whether it's people in the assembly line, if people in the office, people that are providing customer service, teachers, etc. Once we know who we are attacking or who we are prescribing the training for, we have to talk about their conditions. What are they? What is their profile? What are they going to be doing? What background do they have? What things afflict them? What things we should solve for in training? So all of that is a part of the learner analysis, which you already have done. Then we move to the context analysis, which is where we are today. I just provided everybody feedback on that. And essentially what you're doing in the context analysis is you are going to describe what are some of the prerequisites. What do you expect people to know or do prior to coming to the training? Now, not always this is going to be true, but in many cases you need people to come prepared with certain foundation because you need to level the playing field, right? And when you know you can't do that for whatever reason, whether it's people don't have the time, they don't get the paid time to do it, etc., you're going to have to build in a process or a part of your training as the level setting activity. So that is something that you should be able to see, or anybody should be able to see in the task analysis. Now, some of you did have a prerequisite section, some of you didn't. So if you didn't, but you should, this is a good time for you to think about it again, and especially if I gave you feedback around the task analysis where it's not very clear what those actions, what that task needs to be, then think about it. If you don't have a prerequisite section, but you do want them to come in with certain knowledge, but you don't know that they are going to have it, then you need to build that in into the 4 hours, which means that is going to be reflected in the task analysis, right? Now, if you did say, well, this is what people should know before they come to my training, definitely, you're set. No need to describe that in the task analysis. Perhaps one thing that you can do is when you are designing the training, you can come up with an activity that is going to help everybody come together. So bring those that did the prerequisite and bring anybody who probably has done the work before but don't have necessarily the same comparison of knowledge. But an aligning activity is definitely a lot easier than covering an entire content that is not there, especially if you do have it as a prerequisite. Okay, then you need to talk a little bit about the training area. Some of you did fantastic describing that, and while it doesn't necessarily have to be, I have a whiteboard with 2 pieces of chalk and an eraser, etc., but you do need to explain the very basic thing that you need to describe here is is the training environment going to be totally different than where people are currently working? And in some cases, for example, those of you who are working in educational projects, the training area is not really going to be that different, because you're going to bring teachers or faculty into a room or the library or somewhere in the school, and then you're going to turn them away once they're finished with the training and perform also in the school. So that environment is not going to change too much. But where it is really important is where you're bringing people that are on the phones, they are in a cube, and then you bring them into a classroom where they may not even have a phone. They may not have their system in front of them, their computer in front of them. They may have some dumb terminals, or they may have simulations, etc. So you need to explain what the difference is between where they are going to be trained and where they are going to go back to their cube, and what it really looks like and what challenges they may find, because that is going to help the facilitator be informed in terms of what bridging gap conversations need to occur during the training delivery, especially if the environments where they are acquiring the knowledge is different than where they are going to go practice it. So that's why the training area is one thing, and then the performance area, or where they're going to be performing the task, is also important to mention. Some of you did a fantastic job outlining it. Some of you don't necessarily have it very evident. So I suggested in some cases, I think I either put a note at the end or as a note on the side margin to elaborate a little bit more on that, so you can explain exactly where they are, or just at least put a subheading. Then we move into the task analysis, and that is the task analysis is where some of you did a fantastic job. You have it very outlined, and some of you had it, but it was more in paragraph format, which is fine. But think about this. If you were to receive a task analysis from another instructional designer, will you be able to begin designing that training based on that outline? Chances are the answer is no. And that's where I'm asking you. If you were asked to do something of that nature, do you have all the information you need to at least have an idea what direction you need to take? And the problem is, when we are thinking about the project, we usually know most of the details because we are the ones coming up with the idea of it. We are the ones who know exactly what we're going to cover. But if we need to hand it off to somebody else, there are going to be a lot of gaps because we probably have a lot of tacit information. We know it, therefore we're not going to put it down. And that's probably what happened in some of the task analysis that you guys did. So if I might have made a note, so please make sure you revise that task analysis. And so the format, I am not so concerned about the format, whether it's bullet points or text or paragraph, but I am very concerned about you describing what those tasks are. So reflect a little bit on that video from my colleague Brad Shuck, where he was talking about the football analogy. So when you are going to send somebody, not only you are going to send them to practice in the field, you don't want to send them to practice inside of a gym. They can probably exercise there, but if you want them to practice the games, the plays, they have to be where they are going to play, right? But also, the task is going to be how to grab the ball, how they are going to throw the ball, how they are going to pass the ball, how they are going to tackle the quarterback, how they are going to be a deep end receiver, etc. Those are the tasks that you need to be focusing on. In some cases, I did not see that, so I made a note. So make sure you think about those. You cannot be at this stage be generalistic and say there will be some lecturing, there will be some PowerPoint presentations, because I don't know what they are. And again, if you were asking me to develop the training for you, I don't have a good idea even what to go ask the subject matter experts. So while you don't have to be a Webster dictionary on the task analysis, you definitely need to kind of give me those headings. What are we going to talk about? If it's going to be Red Ribbon Week, what are the things that the teachers are going to be getting? Are they going to get techniques on how to make people aware, students aware of the drugs? Are you going to have the teachers list the ranking of the damaging substances? Are you going to, etc.? Do those things, those tasks, those activities that the teachers will need to use during their training with the students. Or if you are going to be training a soldier to do an observation, well then of course, what tool are they going to use, how to interpret the tool, at what point do they need to do the observations, what do they need to consider, what do they not need to consider. Those are the tasks, the actions, the things that you are going to be putting in your task analysis. So make sure you read my feedback and you revise those if you need to. If you'd like me to take a second look at your task analysis, absolutely, because at this point, if your task analysis is not clear, you guys are going to begin running into a wall, and it's going to be frustrating a little bit, because as you can see on my document, once we're finished with the task analysis, we're going to move into the objectives. That is the next deliverable. That objectives and the evaluation, but I'll talk about the evaluation shortly, is due on the 20th of October. So we have a couple of weeks before that is due. However, you already have done an exercise on the objectives, but if we don't have a clear task analysis, we cannot come up with the objectives, and that is where the challenge is going to come for you. So make sure you have those tasks analyzed, and then with the practice we had last week on the objective writing, make sure you, if you got feedback from me around not having a condition or not having a criteria, it is important that you narrow that down, because that is probably the biggest challenge of an instructional designer, to write good learning objectives. And I am fairly demanding when it comes to those, because if we don't have clear, concise learning objectives, the training design is going to fail. So we have to be careful. But that's the next element, okay? And I mentioned the terminal learning objectives, or TLOs, and the enabling learning objectives. And you may remember that the terminal learning objectives is the bigger component, and the enabling are those individual tasks that you're going to have to perform in order to get the terminal objective complete, right? Once you do that, you're going to move into the evaluation plan. That one is also due on the 20th of October, and or whatever date I have on the Blackboard page. And I'm saying this just because if I am using this recording at another date, I want to make sure that it stays relevant. But the evaluation plan essentially is going to be your plan of how you're going to evaluate the whole project. Remember, we talked about Kirkpatrick and the 4 levels of evaluation. Level 1, which is your satisfaction. Level 2, which is the knowledge transfer. Level 3, or knowledge acquisition, excuse me. Level 3, which is the knowledge transfer. How are they using it in the workplace? And level 4, which is the return on investment, and that's the harder one to get. So this week, while we have or may have fall break, I am going to post an exercise where you guys can begin verbalizing what your evaluation plan is going to be. Once you know exactly what you're going to evaluate, then you need to talk about it, which is, if you're going to do a satisfaction evaluation, how are you going to do it? Are you going to include a survey? Are you going to do an interview, etc.? If you're going to do a knowledge transfer awareness, obviously that's the most logical one, is a test. But are you going to do a case study? Are you going to do something of the like? If you're going to do a knowledge transfer evaluation, are you going to set a preceptor role where you're going to have, like, I remember someone has this project where she is, or he, I don't remember exactly who of you guys is doing this, are going to have the expert go through the checklist with the trainee. Well, so that checklist becomes, the interaction with the preceptor. We're going to check and see if the person learned the content. So you need to decide what that is going to look like, and that's what you guys are going to submit in the next deliverable. But once you have done that, then we actually have everything. We have the skeleton of this project, and now it's a matter of delivering it, or I'm sorry, designing it before we deliver. Designing the training is going to entail all these pieces, right? We need to know who we're going to train. That's where the learner analysis comes into play. We need to know what the training space is going to be, so that we can actually think, is this activity going to work in this space physically? Or given that it's going to be a remote location, meaning people are not in the same place, what type of activity can you really use? That's where it really becomes very significant. And then of course the outline, which encompass with the objectives, is going to speak to you in terms of what should you lecture, what should you create a scenario based on, what should you guide the learners on. Think about this course right now. Given the objective, which is precisely developing training, that's actually the goal for this course. I am giving you right now some feedback based on what you guys practice, which was the context analysis and the task analysis. And of course now, beyond that feedback, I'm also giving you the outline of what the entire project is going to be. So this feedback is also helpful, and I'm doing it via this video because we are not in person. And so those are the things that you guys have to think about. When are you going to do what that is going to render your training valuable and it's going to make sense? Now remember, it may not make sense for everybody. You cannot solve for every single learning style. But if you have the ability to solve for almost every learning style in different ways, then your training is going to be valuable. So thinking about this class again, so you have the videos, sometimes you have audio only, sometimes you have a document, and sometimes you have space for you guys to practice, and then I provide you feedback in writing. So you always have that ability. Not to mention if you guys have made connections individually where you talk to each other or send emails or ask questions. So all of that is something for you guys to begin thinking about. So we are way in our way to getting this project done, and so now it's a good time for you to stop and think about what you're doing and how you need to revise it a little bit, or maybe look at what you have done really well. Look at my feedback, and if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. You can send me a text message, you can send me an email, and we can definitely go through it. But make sure you read my feedback, and if it doesn't make sense, again, ask, but definitely revise some of the things that I have suggested, because that way we're going to remove the potential anxiety, the potential frustration, the potential unawareness of things. Okay? All right, guys, if you have any questions, you know where to find me, and I hope everything is okay, and we'll speak soon. Happy Fulbright.